Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Please fasten your seatbelts, then sit back and relax. Get ready to fly by night. Now your host, Ken Sevara.
Welcome, everybody. The show is Fly By Night. I am your host, Ken Sevara, and we have a very fun and interesting show for you today, as our destination is the world of stand-up comedy. And we have a great guest. Comedian Tom Dreesen will be joining us in just a few minutes. But I thought that before I introduce my guest, to kind of set the table, I would give you a kind of a behind-the-scenes look at stand-up comedians through my eyes, the eyes of a professional comedian. And the first thing I would tell you about comedians is that they are all highly intelligent, very highly intelligent. All of the years that I have done comedy, I can honestly say I have never met a stupid comedian. I've met a few who have done stupid things, including myself, but I'll let you get to know me a little better before I start to air out that laundry. It's a comedian's job to hold up society in front of us and say, they're wrong. And when the question comes back, who's wrong? The comedian answers, everybody. And that kind of open criticism towards society could only happen in free speech democracies. That's why there aren't many comedians in Iran. Comedy roast of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad would be the shortest roast ever. First joke about his height, you die. Roast over. Comedians are loners. We generally don't like to run in packs. That's for singers. If a comedian were an animal, he would be a cat and not a dog. Being a comedian, you're going to have many good and bad performances, so you have to keep your emotions very, very steady. Performing comedy on a good night can be a high that you can't even imagine. Like the night that I worked at the Star Theater in Maryville with Gloria Estefan in front of 3,300 people. And from the first joke, they bought it. And you just know that night you're going to kill them. But the next night, just to bring me back down to earth, I'm out bombing in front of 30 toothless wonders in a town I can't even remember. Let's call it Moose Butt, Montana. And I'm dying so bad, I'm seeing all my punchlines flash before my eyes, like people see lives flash on their deathbeds, and I'm still having nightmares from that show 5 years later, which explains the eye tic that I've developed. But personally, even through the tough times, being a comedian has been a great experience for me. Fantastic. I had the opportunity to work with some of the greatest names in show business. I've worked with Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Jerry Seinfeld, Bill Murray, to name just a few. I've traveled, I've seen the country, and I've made many friends doing this job. A lot of friends. And it's those friendships that hold value. And right now, I'd like to introduce you to one of my best friends. He was my manager, my mentor, and if you want to hear some great credits, try these on. He was Frank Sinatra's opening act for 14 years. You've seen him on The Tonight Show and Late Night with David Letterman. He is currently performing a one-man show about his years as Frank Sinatra's opening act called An Evening of Laughter and Memories of Sinatra. Tom Dreesen is my guest.
Hey, how you doing, Kenny?
How you doing, Tom?
It's going real good. And congratulations on your show.
Thank you, buddy.
Fly by night, you know.
Well, it's fun to be here, and I want to acknowledge my producer, Debbie Schreiner, who's smiling at me through the glass. We have to acknowledge the producer. They can cut me off real quick.
I can see that smile. From here, I can see that smile. You know, that's a great title for the show, Fly By Night, because, as you know, as a stand-up comedian, we fly by the seat of our pants almost all of our lives. You know?
Yes, we do.
It probably should be called Fly by the Seat of Our Pants.
It may yet be. You know, Tom, the one thing that I tell everybody who has not met you yet is you are really a true rags to riches American success story, because you grew up very poor. And a lot of people born into those circumstances would have given up. What drove you to be so successful? I mean, what was it?
I think about this. I reflect upon it in my life many times about what was the one thing that, that probably turned my life around. And I think it was when I was in the service and I started reading positive mental attitude books. But I, as you said, I grew up in Harvey, Illinois, a suburb on the south side of Chicago, and I had 8 brothers and sisters. We lived in a shack. 5 of us slept in one bed. We had no bathtub and no shower and no hot water.
Right.
And it wasn't during the Depression. I'm not that old. It was a rat-infested, roach-infested shack. I shined shoes in taverns from the time I was 6 years old till I was 12. I set pins in bowling alleys. As I got older, I caddied in the summertime, and I sold newspapers on the corner and had a paper route, all to help feed my brothers and sisters. And I think that work ethic really helped a lot, too. And I realized as a young person that if it is to be, it was up to me. I read that in a book many years ago, and it just became like a mantra for me. I realized that no one was ever going to give me anything, and that I had to work hard if I wanted to accomplish anything. At 16, I dropped out of high school. I had holes in my shoes. I was embarrassed to go to school. At 17, I went in the Navy, and I spent 4 years in the Navy, and I got a high school diploma from the Navy. And then I went to junior college nights when I came out of the service and studied political science and things like that. But all along, I was searching for this, what is it that I wanted to do in life? What was I put here for? I mean, I was wandering aimlessly, doing all kinds of jobs, odd jobs, working construction, and I was a bartender, and I was a photographer helping my brother in his business. And I just wandered aimlessly until I found stand-up comedy, And then I knew what it was that I was put on this planet for. I knew this is what I wanted to do. And from that point on, I wasn't going to let anybody step on my dream. I had read every positive mental attitude book you could read, from Norman Vincent Peale, Power of Positive Thinking, to your modern-day writers, of course, your Wayne Dyers and everything. And now I actually am a motivational speaker, But I guess that deep determination that I didn't want to fail. I wanted to be a success at something that I love to do, and I found it in stand-up comedy.
Sure. And, I'm assuming you had to work really hard to develop that positive mental attitude. There's a million things going against you, man. You weren't born with a silver spoon in your mouth. This is something that you probably really had to fight, because it's easy going backwards, and it's easy thinking, well, you know what, I'll just give up. I'll throw it in. I mean, you look at today, 49% of people are on some government aid of some kind. So that really must have taken a lot of fortitude, a lot of strength to get through that period in your life.
Well, one of the couple of lessons I learned in life, first of all, I didn't want to be a victim. I wanted to be a victor.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be a victim. And, when we were growing up in Harvey, every Thanksgiving and every Christmas, all the local civic groups would bring baskets of fruit and ham and turkey and walnuts and apples and bananas and oranges, things that my brothers and sisters and I had never seen. And they'd bring it to the shack, all these civic groups, the Moose, the Kiwanis, the Elks, the JCs. And every Thanksgiving and every Christmas, my mother would turn them away. She would say, no, we don't deserve this. My husband has a job, and so we have to send this back. Now, 2 things resonated with me my whole life. Number 1, my mother was right. He had a job, and he should have been taking care of us. And number 2, it wasn't the government bringing us food and stuff. It was people helping people. Mm-hmm. And I realized at an early age that those core values stuck with me, that if you were going to get it, you had to go out and get it. But when you got it, you had to share. From your heart, mind, body, and soul, you had to share with others. And I've never met a successful man or woman in my life that didn't know this, that you can't keep taking from the stream. You have to give something back. As stand-up comedians, we have a great opportunity to do that. We make a great living as a stand-up comedian, but there are so many charities and things that need us, and that we can donate our services to help others within the community. And that's what I like. I like people helping people, and not so much to be reliant on the government.
At that early period, when you were going through all this stuff, who were the positive influences in your life at that time?
I had an older brother, Glenn, who had a work ethic. He was 3 years older than me. And when I was 6 years old, he'd wake me up to get up in the morning to go sell newspapers with him. Because he always said, Tommy's cuter than me. He gets bigger tips. But my older brother, Glenn, had a great work ethic. He was the oldest boy in the family, and he sold newspapers, I sold newspapers. He shined shoes, I shined shoes. He caddied, I caddied. Everything that he did, I followed him. Even he went in the Navy, and I followed him into the Navy a couple of years later. So he was a role model for me, my older brother.
And he also did he sell insurance also? Because I know that you were, before you got into show business, you were a very successful insurance salesman.
Well, what happened was he had a photography business. He didn't sell insurance, and I used to help him in the business once in a while, taking pictures at weddings and sports and stuff. So I'd always had a little job with him every now and then. But what I sold life insurance. A friend of mine talked me into it. I was in the JCs, a civic group, and JCs were in those days young men of action, 18 to 36 years old in the community, and they were taught leadership training programs. And you were taught how to serve on a committee, how to chair a committee, and then how to run projects within the community to make the community a better place to live, but also teaching you to be a leader at the same time.
Tom, we're going to break here just for a few minutes, and we're going to be right back with comedian Tom Dreesen right after this message. This is Fly By Night, AM560.
No 2-hour security lines when you fly by night. Now back to the show with your host, Ken Sevara.
Oh, thanks everybody. And we are back with comedian Tom Dreesen, and we were discussing his early years. And, Tom, what we got to the point where you were in the insurance business. What was it that broke you out of that and actually did attract you to show business?
Well, it's the strangest thing. A friend of mine talked me into I'd like to sell life insurance because I was in the JCs, the civic group. I knew a lot of people, so I had a nest of people. So I started selling life insurance, and they trained me in 2 weeks, and I started selling. And the first year I was a member of the $1 Million Roundtable. I was a real, I believed in the product. I really did. And in the first year I was a member of the $1 Million Roundtable. The second year I quit and I went into show business. The president of the company, it was called Columbus Mutual Life Insurance. The guy flew in from Columbus, Ohio into Chicago, and he said to me, "I've never done this before, but have you lost your mind? You got such a great start." But once you get that show business bug, nothing could change my mind.
Yeah.
But in the JCs, I wrote a drug education program teaching grade school children the ills of drug abuse with humor. It's a concept I had. In those days, they weren't teaching drug education in colleges or in high schools, let alone at an elementary school level.
Right.
And I knew we had to get the kids young and early. So I created this concept that had a lot of humor involved in it, where you get the kids laughing in the classroom, playing music and getting them laughing, and then you would plant the seeds of the ills of drug abuse. So helping with me on this project was a young black man named Tim Reed, who had graduated from Norfolk State College, and E.I. DuPont recruited him into Chicago, and he took a job as a marketing rep there, and he joined the JCs, the chapter I was in, and he worked with me on this project. It became very successful. JC chapters in 50 states and in 22 foreign countries use it as a model program through their publications. And one day, after about a year, a little 8th grade girl in a school called St. John's in Harvey, after we finished the program, she was walking by and she said, "You guys are so funny. You ought to become a comedy team." Mm-hmm. And the thought of a black-white comedy team intrigued us. No one had ever done that before. So we started writing what we thought was material, and we went up like everybody does, and we bombed, but we kept doing it and got the bug. And the moment that the night in Chicago Heights, Illinois, at a place called the Golden Horseshoe that you later worked.
Yep.
But we got a laugh with something I had written, and it was like an epiphany for me. It was like the dark clouds opened up and the sun burst through. I knew that moment, this is what I want to do. I can, to this day, I get chills thinking about it, because I've been in show business 45 years. That was the defining moment when I got that laugh or something I had written. I knew I wanted to be a comedian the rest of my life.
And that's a very powerful opiate, that first laugh, isn't it?
Oh, stand-up comedy. Comedy is the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. You just described it in your opening. I mean, when you're out in front, I went out in the opening for Sinatra, 20,000 people, and when you got them in the palm of your hand and they're cheering and laughing and applauding, when you walk off the stage, there's no describing
absolutely
that high. And conversely, when you're out there with that material that worked the night before and it doesn't work the next night, there's no describing that low either.
And it's like there's no formula to it. Some nights they're not up to it. Some nights you're not up to it. So,
well, since this is at nighttime, I'll give you my analogy, and I'm not trying to be cute here. I've always said stand-up comedy is a lot like sex. Some nights I'm really, really good out there, and they're not. I'm really good. And some nights they're really good, and I'm not. They're way better than I am. And some nights we're both good at the same time, and that's no describing. That's
Well, let me ask you, talking about Tim and Tom, was America ready for a black-white comedy team in the 70s? Because I know you guys experienced some prejudice.
Well, in 1969, on September 1969, we went on stage for the first time. The fourth time we ever appeared on stage, a guy put a lit cigarette out in Tim's face.
Oh, my God.
Tried to beat me half to death. I boxed when I was in the service, but this guy outweighed me by 100 pounds and pummeled me. And after that brawl, tables and chairs all over it was a madness. Tim and I got in the car that night. I could hardly breathe. My ribs were all crushed, and Tim's face was scarred. And he looked at me and he said, "Welcome to show business." But there were people that loved what we did in that era, that time, really loved what we did, but there were people that didn't. You got to remember, the Vietnam War was raging at that time.
Yeah.
Tim and I had just gotten out of the service. Tim just got out of college, and the Vietnam War was raging. Students were protesting all over America the war. African Americans were burning cities down and rioting, feeling disenfranchised from the system. And in fact, riots in Harvey, Illinois, where I was from, there was huge riots there. But all over the country, in the midst of all of this, Tim and I were going out trying to make people laugh. The interesting thing about racism, if there was a black guy who hated white people with a passion, we used to work all black clubs. Tim and I would work what they called the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. Mm-hmm. The Sugar Shack in Boston, the 20 Grand in Detroit, the High Chaparral in Chicago, the Burning Spear in Chicago, the Club Harlem in Atlantic City. But in a black club, if there was a black guy who hated white people with a passion, he wasn't mad at me. He was mad at Tim for being with me.
Yeah.
Tim would be an Uncle Tom. If there was a white guy, a redneck, who hated black people, he wasn't mad at Tim. He's mad at me for being with Tim. See, I'm the N-word lover, and they didn't mind calling me that or catching me in the men's room, 2 or 3 of them sometimes, some rednecks where I had to have my hands full, But we survived. We persevered. We worked the Playboy circuit. We did some national television. We had an album out. But finally, in frustration after 6 years, the team split up. And we since have written a book about those 6 years, which is now becoming a movie. The book is called Tim and Tom, an American Comedy in Black and White. And
that was by Ron Rappaport, correct?
Well, actually, Tim and I wrote it with Ron.
Yeah.
We all add it, but yeah, with Ron Rappaport.
Now, who's playing you and who's playing Tim?
Well, that's a good question. The guy who wants to play me in the movie, we're going to call the movie Before Our Time, because everybody who's ever seen us or read the book would say, you guys are before your time, But this kid, Ryan Filippi, wants to play me. He read the book, and he came up to me one time and they said he'd like to play me. So who knows? I mean, I'm going to be a consultant on the film, but the casting will be from the people who put up all the money, as you know. So
do you think we're still as racially polarized as we were then? Have we made much progress, or are we still stagnant in that department?
Well, it's an interesting thing that John McCain and Barack Obama, to their credit, in 2008, were saying we need more discourse among the races. We need more discourse among the races. In 1969, Tim Reed and Tom Dreesen were the only discourse among the races. I mean, you'd see Bill Cosby and Robert Culp on a TV show, or Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder in a movie. Tim and I were out there in the trenches. You didn't see a black guy and a white guy walking down the street together in those days unless they were cops, Mm-hmm. So Tim and I, wherever we went, even if we weren't talking about race, if we were on stage talking about going to buy a hamburger, we were a black guy and a white guy having a discourse that America wasn't having. And so, I think that there's a long way to go, but we are not a racist nation anymore, in my opinion. The laws protect that. I mean, are there racists in America? Absolutely, in the black community and the white community, but not in the numbers that there were when Tim and I started out. But does racism exist? As long as there's different races, it will always exist. But we in America have, while we made a lot of mistakes in America, we also, those same people, the descendants of those people, amended those mistakes. And today we're a much better nation for it. And I was proud to be Tim's comedy partner, and I'm proud to be his friends, and we're the best of friends to this day.
Well, and also with the election of Barack Obama, we've now elected our first black president, so people can no longer say that, we're exclusively white club in that department anymore. We have opened that up, and hopefully other things will follow.
Well, and also what will follow this is that at some point America is going to address the fact that if you disagree with a man of color, it doesn't mean that you're a racist. It just means you disagree with his ideology.
Right.
And that's getting a little more and more apparent. It wasn't at first, but I think it's getting more and more apparent. One thing, I had a friend named Theophilus Boykin that used to live in Allgale Gardens.
First of all, that's a great name.
Yeah, isn't another good name? I used to call him Teddy, but we worked at Pullman Standard, one of the jobs I had when I came out of service. And he loved America like I loved America, but he used to say to me, Tommy, be honest. He said, could my son, I know you say America is the land of opportunity, could my son grow up to become president of the United States? And I have to look him in the eye and I'd say, no, Teddy, you're right. I mean, and it would hurt, but I can't say that anymore. I mean, I thought about him a lot of times and I thought, gee, I hope he's alive somewhere knowing, that America has changed.
Sure. And you just hope we continue to make progress in that direction.
Right.
Why did you guys break up?
Well, in the book, I should say, read the book and you'll find out. But that's to tease you. But actually, a woman kind of came between us, and that's in the book, and it's in the movie.
Oh, hey.
A guy told us when we first started out, a friend named Marvin Jr., who the lead singer in a group called the Dells.
Yep.
It was the only reference I had to show business. And Harvey, the Dells had 9 gold records. Oh, what a night! Stay in my corner. They were very famous, and I was proud of them being. And I grew up with them. So when we first went into show business, we went to Marvin and talked to him, Tim and I, and he said, "Remember, there are people in our business that will try to divide you. They'll look at you as a threat. So this game people play called Divide and Conquer."
You got it. Hold that point, and we will be right back. This is AM560 Fly By Night.
Fasten your seatbelts. You're back on the air with Fly By Night.
Hey, we're back with comedian Tom Dreesen, and before we went to break, you were telling us that you and Tim broke up because of a woman?
Well, again, when we first started out in show business, somebody told us that there might be someone that will come along and try to divide and conquer, because people, for some reason, that's a game they play. And sure enough, there was, and I won't mention her name, but there was a woman we were opening for. She was a singer, and she took a liking to Tim. And she started telling Tim that, he'd probably be better off being alone. And next thing you know, he moved out to the West Coast and out in Beverly Hills, and it kind of divided the act, and finally the act broke up, and it broke my heart. To me, it was like a broken marriage, because, I mean, I had a wife and 3 kids, he had a wife and 2 kids, and it broke up his marriage, as well as it broke up our comedy team.
And by the way, I remember talking to you during that period.
Yeah, I was low, wasn't I?
You were low.
It was hard to come back, and I had to reach down in my resources of everything that I've ever read about positive mental attitude, and to pick myself, as Frank Sinatra sang in the song, you got to pick yourself up and get back in the race.
Well, and by the way, to let people know the kind of person you are, when I broke up with my comedy team, you were there to console me. You had already been through it.
Yeah, it's a tough time, because when you put all your hopes and dreams into one package, into a company, into a business, and you believe that business is going to be a huge success, and you devote yourself to it morning, noon, and night, and after 6 years of a lot of ups and downs that we did, and finally getting on the Playboy circuit, that was a success, and getting on national television, getting an album out, those kind of things, and still it didn't work. It breaks your heart, but that doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And I just decided I was going to become a stand-up. I was going to stay in comedy because I loved it, and I was going to go it alone.
And that's a hard transition, isn't it, Tom? Because, having been a member of a team, you're used to the back and forth patter, but now suddenly you're up there alone, and it's a whole different way of approaching, stand-up, isn't it?
Totally. There are very few comedy teams out there today. As you know, there were a lot when we started out, but very few today, because it takes a special skill to be in a comedy team. Mm-hmm. That set up punchline, and the timing has to be so precise, and you can't step on your partner's laugh and those kind of things that you have to learn. But as a stand-up, one of the things that was really good for me, though, having the experience of being with the team, as a stand-up, I had far more freedom.
Sure.
I could let my mind go, and you can't put a lid on a comedian. And that was what was really fun for me as a stand-up is that I could get a stream of consciousness going and go with it, go with the flow.
And then plus, if you want to deal with the audience, you can deal with the audience. When you're in a team, you're in a set bit, and it makes it hard to ad-lib anything.
Absolutely, and those are fun. But it was a great experience, really great experience. I ended up on the West Coast. The team broke up. I ended up, in those days, Johnny Carson used to be in New York many years ago.
Sure.
Tonight Show, and then it moved to the West Coast. So all the comics migrated to the West Coast because in 1975, when the team split up, anywhere you went in America, people say, "What do you do for a living?" You say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." The next question out of their mouth was, "Oh yeah, you ever been on Johnny Carson?" Mm-hmm. And if you hadn't been on Johnny Carson, in the eyes of America, in those years, you weren't a comedian. So everybody migrated to the West Coast in those days. David Letterman, Jay Leno, me. I used to be on stage every night at the Comedy Store, begging to work for free. I'd go over there and I'd be on stage with all these unknowns: Robin Williams, Gallagher, David Letterman, Jay Leno, Michael Keaton. The girl waiting tables was Deborah Winger.
Sure.
But we were all out there to try to get on that Tonight Show, and so that's where I went, and that's what I did. I struggled and strived and wrote material and got up on stage every night, every chance I could, and anywhere I could. I would play a phone booth if you promised to call.
All right, so Carson obviously was, like you said, what everybody was trying to get to. He was the promised land. He was the talk show host of our lifetime. And what was the Tonight Show like doing it with Johnny Carson the first time?
The first time, there's no describing. By nature, I'm a calm stand-up. I enjoy stand-up comedy. I don't get panicky and nervous and throw up before the show. I love going out there. But that first Tonight Show, there was a lump in my throat the size of a grapefruit. I mean, there's no describing because it had the power. If you scored, Freddie Prinze was on before me, a couple of years before me. You knew Freddie as well.
Sure.
He did one appearance on The Tonight Show. The next day, he had his own sitcom. Mm-hmm. He was on the cover of Time magazine, for God's sake. The Tonight Show had such power that one appearance could change your life. And I had a wife and 3 kids out on the West Coast, and I was on unemployment, struggling. And so that first Tonight Show, when you finally get it, and they bumped me 3 times. I'd go there, get put in makeup, and they'd run out of time. And the 4th time I got there, I'm in makeup, and Freddie DeCordova, the producer, came in the makeup room, and he said, "I got bad news for you." And I said, "What?" He said, "You're going on tonight." Going on the nerves. And then Bert Convy was on the show that night with Carol Burnett, and she was doing comedy, and he sang a song, and they finally got me. They come and get you, and you come out of the green room, and you walk that long walk, and all the stagehands and everybody are behind the curtain there. When you're a veteran, they go, "Hey, Dreesen, how you doing? How's your Cubs?" And they do all that, a lot of friendly stuff. But when you're new, your first time, they all turn their back on you and they whisper, "It's his first time. It's his first time."
Yeah.
And they put you behind that curtain. Doc Severinsen is playing during commercial break, and the coordinator said, "Are you all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine." And he leaves you, and all of a sudden you're talking to God one-on-one because you can't remember the first line, and pretty soon the music stops because they're coming out of commercial break, and your heart stops.
Hold on to that thought, because I want to pick up on that when we come back from the break. This is AM560 Fly By Night.
Get lots of frequent flyer points when you fly by night. Now, back to the show.
Hey, we are back with comedian Tom Dreesen, and when we left to go for break, we were talking about Tom's first Tonight Show when he was just about getting ready to step out of that curtain. What was that feeling like?
Well, again, the nerves, and that 15 million people in those days watched the show. All the agents, the producers, the nightclub owners across the land. You knew this could be a big break. Not only that, my mother had everybody back in Harvey, Illinois watching it, so if I bombed, I couldn't even go back home,
Right.
And they open that, you hear Johnny Carson, Doc Severinsen stops the music, they're out of commercial break, and Johnny says, "We're back now. And I'm glad you're in such a good mood tonight, because my next guest is making his first appearance on The Tonight Show." That key word, "I'm glad you're in such a good mood tonight," that key sentence, Johnny set him up, because he's making his first. They open the curtain and you walk out, and now it's like you're in an operating room, bright lights, you can't see the audience. There's a red light on the camera further ahead that that's your camera. There's a mark on the ground, a T on the floor that you hit that spot. And oh my God, the pressure, and then the audience is applauding, and then you do your first joke and it got a laugh, and I did my second joke and it got a laugh, and I did my third joke.
And then are you relieved? I mean, as you're doing the third joke and now you're getting a laugh and you're in a rhythm, okay?
Yeah,
because
by the third joke I was feeling real good, and then the fourth joke I heard Johnny laughing behind me. It was like heaven hearing his laughter, and then I got on a roll. I got 11 applause, and then I closed. I said, "You've been a wonderful audience. This has been my first appearance on the Tonight Show, and show business is a tough life. If you like me, just if you like me, and you're Protestant, say a prayer. If you're Catholic, light a candle. If you're Jewish, somebody in your family owns a nightclub. Tell me." And then I walked through the curtain, and the coordinator come running up, and he said, "Go back. They want you back. They want you back."
Oh man.
So I went back out, and Johnny, everybody was applauding, and Johnny put that little circle in his finger that meant you had arrived. But to the world, to America, I had arrived as a stand-up because I did my first Tonight Show. But to my industry, you don't arrive till you sit down and talk to Johnny.
Yeah, you get couch time.
Couch time, yeah. And so I had to do a couple more spots before Johnny let me come and sit by him. On my third appearance, Johnny called me over. And once you sat down and talked to Johnny, to show business, you had arrived, you know.
And that must have been, I mean, did you sleep that night?
Oh, I'm going to tell you a true story. After that first Tonight Show, I had report date at the unemployment office. Now, the Tonight Show aired late.
When you were reporting to the unemployment office?
Yes. The next day, I had to apply. I had to sign up. Now, I did my first Tonight Show, and when I went to the unemployment office the next morning, the show aired late at night.
Yeah.
While I was at the unemployment office, all hell was breaking loose at my house. At my apartment. I didn't know that. A guy named Lee Curlin from CBS saw me in New York. He'd watch it. He called and they signed me to a development deal at CBS. I got $10,000 check, and I got $1,850 a month for 1 year. $25,000. Now, in those days, that was a ton of money.
Sure was.
I could feed my family and take care of my kids and still work on my craft, you know. William Morris signed me. I mean, everything was happening the next day. Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, all those shows wanted me, you know. But while I'm in the unemployment line, and a guy in front of me turned around, and he looked at me, and then he went to look forward again, and he turned around and he looked at me again, and he said, "Were you on the Tonight Show last night?" I should have said no, and I said, "Yeah." I was kind of proud. I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I thought so." And he starts telling everybody, all these guys on the line, "Hey, this guy was on the Tonight Show." And some guy next to him said to him, "He was not on the Tonight Show. We're in the unemployment. I wasn't stupid." And it was so embarrassing, you know. But when I got home, the phone was ringing off the hook. My whole life changed. I have never stopped working since that first Tonight Show.
That's
unbelievable.
unbelievable.
I did 61 appearances on the Tonight Show, you know, and since that time. But I've been busy ever since, you know.
Well, I mean, those moments that you remember forever, those are life-changing moments. Those are great moments. Yeah,
it's hard to describe how that one show could launch you in those days. Today, television is far bigger. There is no one show that can launch a comedian today. The interesting thing, in all the years Jay Leno has been on, he's never launched one comedian off the show. And
why is that? I know that Jimmy Walker had made a big deal about that on Letterman show, I believe.
Well, in defense, David launched one comedian. He launched Jay Leno. You know, but and I do David Letterman show 3 times a year, and he's a dear friend, and I love doing the show. But in their defense, television is far more vast today. There's 800 stations out there. You know, when we were doing it in those days, there was ABC, NBC, CBS, and maybe a couple other local stations. But you know, so one show could launch you. Before that, the Ed Sullivan Show on a Sunday night, 40 million people watch that show on a Sunday night. One appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, you'd be headlining Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but today television is too vast, and also there used to be when I was first started out, as you know, Kenny, you started out the same time as me. If you went anywhere in America and somebody said, "What do you do for a living?" You say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." They'd go, "Wow, Martha, come here. He's a stand-up comedian."
Yeah.
Today, they say, "What do you do?" Say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." They say, "So's my chiropractor." Yeah, my dentist does it on weekends over at Cuddles. You know?
Yeah. It's always Cuddles, Chuckles, Giggles. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There were none of the. You remember when I started out? There were no comedy clubs in America.
No, there weren't. And by the way, you started one of the first here in Chicago, Le Pub.
It was the first. It was called Le Pub in Chicago, right. And you worked there when you were with the comedy team.
Yep.
But there were no comedy clubs in America. There was one in New York, the Improvisation, but it didn't pay. So today there's 550 of them. You know.
And when we get back, we're going to talk to Tom about his time with Frank Sinatra, and that is a fantastic discussion waiting to happen. This is Fly By Night, AM560. I'm Ken Sevara, your host, and we will be right back in just a few moments. Stay with us.
You're always first class when you fly by night. Now, back to the show.
This is my kind of town. Chicago is my
God, that man sounds good. He will never, ever not sound good. We are talking with comedian Tom Dreesen, and I wonder what it must have been like for you on the day that you got the word that Frank Sinatra wanted you to be his opening act.
When I was a little boy shining shoes in Harvey, Frank Sinatra was on every jukebox. And then years later, I'm flying in his private jet all over the country. When I was a bartender, I'd hear that song, "Come Fly With Me, Let's Fly Away." And my buddies in the bar would say, "Man, what do you think that'd be like, flying with Frank, Sandy, and Dean, and all that stuff?" And here I was flying with him, you know. The second night I worked with him, he and his wife took me out to dinner. And in the middle of dinner, he set his knife and his fork down. He said, "I like your material, and I like your style. I'd like you to do a few other dates with me, if you're interested."
Oh, my God.
And I didn't say, "Let me check my calendar." I said, "Oh, yeah." And it turned into 14 years of 45, 50 cities a year, flying all over the country.
That's unbelievable.
And a friendship, that lasted. He was like a father to me in so many ways. He was a buddy and like a father.
Yeah, in that respect, the media always portrays people a certain way, and they portrayed Sinatra a certain way, but from all of the things that I have heard you say about him, he was a completely different person than that of the media portrayal.
He was a tough guy, yeah. Did he do things his way? That's why my way should only be sung by him, yes. He wasn't a saint, but he did some saintly things.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about Frank Sinatra, there was no middle. If Frank worked, he worked harder than anybody, and you better do the show is the most important thing. Everybody better know their job because he knew his. And if he played, you want to play with him, he'd drink till dawn every night with all you. If he loved, he worshipped the ground you walked on. And if he hated like a Sicilian. So there was no middle,
Right.
He was a good man who believed in the show, that the show was the most important thing. He used to say to me, "We owe our audience one thing, Tommy, and one thing only. We owe our fans. When they put their hard-earned dollars down to see us, we got to give them the best possible show we can give them. We don't slough off the show." And he did more for charity than anybody I know, and he did it privately and quietly. He didn't want it to be known. So I learned a great deal from him. I was a pallbearer at his funeral,
Sure.
and I spoke at his funeral. And I knew when I was touring with him that he was larger than life. I turned down more sitcoms than most comedians get offered in a lifetime, because every time the networks would come to me, I knew I'd have to quit touring with Frank, and I didn't want to do that. I knew it was the end of an era. And it was a show business that I admired so much that I knew that era was ending too. And I just wanted to be a part of it till the end.
Well, and you're doing a great show about his life right now and your time with him called An Evening of Laughter and Memories of Sinatra. And I've had the opportunity to book that show a couple times at CD and Me, a venue on the south side of Chicago. And, it's a great and passionate play, a one-man show about your friendship with him and all of the great memories that you have.
Yeah, because everywhere I go, I knew that and I told Frank this on a plane one time, I said, no matter what I do in my life, my obituary is going to say the comedian who toured with Frank Sinatra. I could find a cure to cancer, but my obituary is going to say the comedian who toured with Frank Sinatra, because he's larger than life. And I know that. So everywhere I've gone ever since Frank passed away, every show I'm on, every time I do David Letterman show, he asks me, "Tell me a Frank Sinatra story." So I put it into a one-man play, and I'm doing it all over the country, and it's called An Evening of Laughter and Memories of Sinatra, and it's selling out, and I'm very excited about that. I do stand-up comedy, of course, and then I segue over to a bar, and the lights go down low, and Frank starts singing, and we segue from there, and all the stories, and I take the audience on that journey with me.
Tom, thank you so much for being a guest on Fly By Night tonight. Hey, if you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at flybynightwithken@gmail.com. I want to thank my guest comedian Tom Dreesen for being on the show, and I would like to thank Big John Howell for all of his encouragement. I'd like to thank my producer Debbie Schreiner, and I would like to thank Paula Peterson for bringing me to WIND. Paula, I can't thank you enough for all of the work that you put into this show. Big thanks goes out to our sponsor, Zanies. Chicagoland, they have 3 comedy clubs now, Zanies at Pheasant Run and the brand new Zanies in Rosemont, and of course, the Downtown Club. Tune in next week when my guest will be Bert Haas from Zanies. This has been Fly By Night. I'm Ken Sevara. Stay tuned for Twilight Zone.